For as long as Elena could remember, the comparison had been the same. Jessica was the one with ambition. Jessica was the one who worked hard. Jessica was the one who was going somewhere. Elena was the other one. At that table, Elena had spent years being invisible, present, watching, absorbing every comparison, every casual dismissal, every moment she was reminded that she came second. And nobody, not once, had stopped to ask what she was building while they weren't looking. What Diane never knew, what she never once thought to ask, was what Elena had been quietly working toward for 3 years. And the day the letter arrived, everything Diane believed about both of her daughters was turned completely upside down. Hi, I'm Luna, and this is Poppy. Today's story is about a young woman who spent years being told she wasn't enough, not by strangers, by the person who was supposed to be family. And it's about what happens when the truth finally arrives, quietly on a Tuesday morning, in an envelope. Stay with us. This one is going to surprise you. If you've ever been compared to someone else and made to feel like you came up short, this story is for you. Stay until the end. Elena Vasquez was 23 years old and had lived in the Mercer house since she was 11. That was the year her father, Robert, had married Diane. The year the house that had been hers and her father's became something more complicated. Not immediately. Nothing complicated arrives immediately. It arrives in layers, the way cold does. First a chill, then a draft, then a temperature that has simply become the climate of a place. Diane was not a violent woman. She did not raise her voice. She did not issue ultimatums or make scenes. She did something quieter and, in some ways, more lasting. She compared, constantly, casually, without apparent awareness that she was doing it at all. It had started in small ways. The year Elena moved in, Jessica, Diane's daughter, 14 at the time, and already confident in the particular way of someone who has never been made to feel uncertain, was held up as the standard by which everything was measured. Jessica keeps her room so organized. You might want to take a note, Elena. Jessica got an A in that subject last year. I'm sure you'll get there eventually. Jessica's teacher said she's exceptionally focused. It's a wonderful quality. Each comment was delivered without heat. Without malice, even, or at least without visible malice. That was what made them so difficult to name. There was nothing you could point to precisely. Nothing that crossed a line that anyone else would recognize as a line. Just the steady, patient accumulation of being told in 100 quiet ways that you were less. Elena had been hearing it for 12 years. She had learned somewhere around year 3 not to show that she heard it. She had learned somewhere around year 7 to use it, not as fuel for anger. She had tried that once and it had cost her more than it was worth, as information. Information about what she was going to prove and how and to whom. Her mother had died when Elena was 8. Her name was Carmen. She had been a graphic designer, freelance, always busy, always with a sketchbook somewhere nearby. She had taught Elena to draw before Elena could read. Had told her, with the specific certainty of someone who means it, you see things other people miss. Elena had held on to that. Through the move, through the new house, through the years of Diane's comparisons and Jessica's easy confidence. She had held on to it the way you hold on to something small and certain in the middle of everything uncertain. You see things other people miss. She intended to prove that true. She had a system. Most people who knew her, the few who looked closely enough, would have called it discipline. Elena would have called it something simpler, the only thing that made sense. She woke early. She worked before the house was awake. She used the 40 minutes on the bus to and from university as protected time, sketchbook out. Headphones in, the particular quality of attention that comes when you remove yourself from the ambient noise of other people's expectations. She had learned by necessity to create her own silence, not physical silence, The Mercer house was rarely physically silent, but internal silence, the kind that lets you hear your own thinking. Her mother had had it. Elena had watched her work in the evenings at the kitchen table. A sketchbook and a cup of tea with a quality of absorption that suggested the rest of the world had politely agreed to wait. Elena had inherited it. It was the most valuable thing she had. The Mercer house was the kind of house that looked, from the outside, like a good life. 4 bedrooms, a garden that Diane maintained with genuine care, a kitchen that was always clean and smelled of something baking on Sunday mornings. It looked like the kind of house where everyone inside it was happy. Robert, Elena's father, was a quietly optimistic man who believed, with a sincerity that was almost painful, that his marriage had made his daughter's life better. He had provided Jessica, who was confident and social and successful, and whom he genuinely liked. He had provided Diane, who was organized and capable and who kept the house running with an efficiency he deeply appreciated. What he had not provided, what he did not see, because he was not the kind of man who looked for it, was the particular atmosphere that existed in that house when he wasn't looking. He worked long hours. He traveled for work several times a year. He was present but not always watching, and Diane was careful about when she spoke. Elena had understood this by the time she was 14. She had understood that certain things happened in certain configurations when her father was out of the room, when the dynamic shifted, when Diane had an audience that made her comfortable. She had understood that naming this would cost her more than absorbing it. So she absorbed it. That was the thing people who didn't know her might have assumed. Quiet is not the same as passive. Elena was, in fact, one of the most directed people in that house. She simply directed herself inward, toward the work, toward the things she was building that nobody in the Mercer household knew anything about. She had a sketchbook, always. The habit inherited from her mother. And she had, since her second year of university, a portfolio. Not a metaphorical one. A real one, digital, meticulously curated, added to and refined across 3 years of focused private effort. She studied graphic design at a state university 40 minutes from home. She had chosen it partly for the program and partly for the distance, close enough to maintain the household peace, far enough to have hours every day that belonged entirely to her. Diane had not been enthusiastic about the choice. She had said carefully that graphic design was a very competitive field. She had said, less carefully, that Jessica was considering law. Elena had said, "I know. I'll be fine." She had said it the way she said most things, quietly, without argument, with the particular stillness of someone who has already decided. The comparisons had evolved over the years, the way a habit evolves. More sophisticated, more targeted, but recognizably the same thing it had always been. In the early years, they had been about grades, tidiness, social ease. By the time Elena reached university, they had shifted to ambition, direction, the seriousness with which one approached one's future. Jessica was applying to law school. This had become, in Diane's telling, the central fact of family life. The application process, the preparation, the weight of what it meant, all of it narrated at the dinner table with the gravity of a national event. One evening in October, during Elena's final year of university, the conversation arrived at its familiar destination. Diane said Jessica's been working with a tutor twice a week. The preparation for the entrance exam alone is a full-time commitment. Robert said it sounded demanding. Diane said, "It is, but that's what it takes when you're serious about your future." She had not looked at Elena when she said it. She didn't need to. Elena had been eating soup. She continued eating soup. She said nothing. Later, when Robert had gone to his study and Jessica had retreated to her room to call a friend, Diane had found Elena in the kitchen washing up. She had said, "You know, it's not too late to think about redirecting. Design is lovely as a hobby, but in terms of career security, Elena said. "I'm fine, Diane," Diane said. "I'm just thinking about your future," Elena said. "I know." She finished the dishes. She dried her hands. She went to her room. But it was what happened the following Sunday then Elena carried longest. A lunch. Diane's sister and her husband had come over. The kind of gathering that made the Mercer house feel like a performance of itself. The conversation had turned, as it often did in these situations, to the future, to plans, to what the young people were doing. Diane's sister had asked about Jessica first. Diane had described the law school applications, the preparation, the ambition, the clarity of direction, with the particular warmth of someone presenting evidence. Then the sister had turned to Elena. She had said, "And what about you, Elena? What are you studying?" Before Elena could answer, Diane had said, "Elena is doing graphic design. It's creative. Not everyone needs to aim as high as Jessica. Some people just need something stable." She had said it pleasantly. Without apparent awareness, Elena didn't react, but something in her settled. The particular settling that happens when a decision you have already made becomes, in one moment, completely clear. She was going to finish the application. She was going to submit the best work she had ever done, and she was going to do it without saying a single word about it to anyone in that house. Her sister had nodded and smiled, and the conversation had moved on. Elena had looked at her soup. She had taken a breath. She had continued eating. Later in her room, she had opened her laptop. She had looked at the portfolio she had been building for 2 years, at the work that she knew, with the quiet certainty of someone who has looked at it honestly, was exceptional. Not everyone needs to aim as high. She made a note in her sketchbook. 3 words. Watch me work. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. She had been working on a submission for the past 6 weeks. A scholarship application, one of the most competitive in her field, open to final year design students nationally. She had not told anyone in the house she was applying. She had learned long ago that some things were kept whole by being kept private. What Diane didn't know, what nobody in that house knew, was that Elena had been working towards something for 3 years, something that was almost ready, and when it arrived, it would arrive quietly, the way the most important things always do. You don't share what you're building until it's built. She worked until midnight. She was 3 weeks from submitting. She had no idea what was about to happen. Neither did anyone else in that house. She went to sleep. She got up the next morning and made coffee and was at the table when Diane came downstairs. She said, "Good morning." Diane said, "Good morning." The house continued exactly as it always had. If you've ever kept working quietly while someone doubted you out loud, leave a like on this story, because Elena deserves to be seen, and so does every person like her. Elena had known she wanted to design since she was 9 years old. Her mother had shown her once how a single change in color temperature could shift the entire emotional register of an image. How what you put in the frame mattered less than what you chose to leave out. How negative space was not absence, but presence of a different kind. She had never forgotten that lesson. It had become, over the years, the organizing principle of how she thought about everything. At university, she had been a focused and somewhat solitary student. Not unfriendly, she had 2 close friends, Maya and Soren, who had been in her cohort since the first year and who understood, without needing it explained, that Elena was the kind of person who needed large amounts of uninterrupted time. She gave what she had, and they accepted it. It was a friendship built on quality rather than quantity, and it worked. Her professors had noticed her in the 2nd year. Not loudly. Elena was not someone who sought that kind of attention, but in the way that people who are paying close attention notice things, a comment here, an extended critique there, an invitation to submit work to a student exhibition that she had attended quietly and left before the reception. She had a style that was difficult to categorize and therefore difficult to dismiss. It was precise without being cold, emotional without being sentimental. It looked like someone who had spent a long time learning to see clearly. The scholarship she was applying for was called the Meridian Award. It was offered annually by a design foundation, one of the oldest in the country, to a single final-year student whose portfolio demonstrated both exceptional technical ability and what the application materials described as original vision. The prize included a full-funded year at a prestigious design institute abroad, a mentorship with a senior practitioner, and a cash award significant enough to change the material shape of a young person's life. Jessica had applied for it 2 years earlier. She had been studying communications at the time, a degree she had since abandoned in favor of her law school aspirations. She had made it to the second round and had not been selected. Diane had presented this as evidence of the scholarship's excessive difficulty. Elena had noted privately that reaching the second round was not the same as not being selected, but she had not said this. She had simply continued working, refining, selecting, removing everything that wasn't necessary until what remained was exactly what she meant. The application had taken her 3 months. She had submitted it on a Thursday evening alone in her room with a cup of tea that had gone cold. She had submitted it on a Thursday evening, alone in her room, with a cup of tea that had gone cold. She closed the laptop, she did not tell anyone, and that was the moment everything started to shift. Even if nobody in the house knew it yet. She had closed the laptop, she had not told anyone. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in February. Elena was the only one downstairs when it came. She heard the sound, the particular sound of something, sliding through the front door slot and landing on the mat, and she set down her coffee and walked to the hallway. There were 3 envelopes. 2 were bills. 1 had her name on it. In the return address corner, the Meridian Foundation. She picked it up. She stood in the hallway for a moment. The house was still. Upstairs, she could hear the distant sound of a shower running. Diane, getting ready for work. She took the envelope to the kitchen. She sat down at the table. She opened it. She read it once. Then she set it down on the table and looked at the garden through the kitchen window. The garden was cold and gray, and the roses Diane kept along the fence were bare. She read the letter again. Dear Miss Vasquez, it is our great pleasure to inform you that you have been selected as this year's recipient of the Meridian Award. The selection committee noted your portfolio's exceptional originality and the maturity of your visual voice, qualities that distinguished your submission from a highly competitive field of over 400 applicants. 400 applicants. 1 award. Her name. She sat with that for a long time. She sat with it the way you sit with something you have worked toward for a long time and have not quite let yourself believe in until this moment. She thought about her mother, about a sketchbook and a lesson about negative space and a voice saying, "You see things other people miss." She had seen them, and now, finally, someone else had too. Someone else had too. She folded the letter carefully. She put it back in the envelope. She finished her coffee. She was still sitting at the kitchen table when Diane came downstairs. Diane moved through the kitchen with her usual morning efficiency. Coffee, toast, a quick scan of her phone. The particular choreography of a person whose mornings are planned to the minute. She said without looking up, Elena said, "I got a letter." Diane glanced over. Then she looked at the envelope. Then she read the return address. Something shifted in her face, a small adjustment, quick and controlled. She said, "The Meridian Foundation?" Elena said, "Yes." Diane said, "What did they want?" Elena picked up the envelope and held it out. Diane took it. Diane took it. But Diane wasn't ready for what she was about to read. She read it more slowly the second time, replying to demands. The kitchen was very quiet. Outside, a bird was doing something in the garden. The refrigerator hummed. Diane set the letter down on the counter. Her hand was not entirely steady. She noticed this. She pressed her palm flat against the counter for a moment. Outside, the bird in the garden was still making its sound. The refrigerator hummed. The house was exactly the same as it always was, and yet something in it had shifted irrevocably in the space of 2 minutes. She did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, "I didn't know you applied for this." Elena said, "I know." Diane said, "Jessica applied for this 2 years ago." Elena said, "I remember." Another silence. Diane said, "She made it to the second round." Elena looked at her. She did not say, "I know." She did not say, "And I won it." She simply looked with the steady, patient gaze of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a room to become quiet enough to hear the truth. Diane looked back at the letter. Then she looked at Elena, and for the first time in 12 years, she did not seem to know what to say. Robert heard about the letter that evening. Elena told him herself at the dinner table, simply and without ceremony. She played that, "I know." Elena said, "I know, Anita doesn't himself." He read it once, then he looked at his daughter. Then he read it again. When he looked up the second time, there was something in his expression that Elena had not seen there in a long time. Something that was trying to become the right thing and was not quite sure what that was yet. He said, "Elena, this is extraordinary." She said, "Thank you, Dad." He said, "How long have you been working on this application?" She said, 3 months for the submission, 3 years for the portfolio." He was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a man who was doing arithmetic he should have done a long time ago. He said, "Why didn't you tell us you were applying?" Elena looked at him. She thought about how to answer that honestly without making it something that required more from the evening than the evening could hold. She said, "I didn't want to talk about it before I knew it was true." It was also, she understood, not the complete truth. The complete truth was more complicated and had more history in it than a dinner table could contain. She let the partial truth stand. The full truth was this: she had not told them because telling them would have meant enduring the commentary, the careful concern, the comparisons, not malicious perhaps, but inevitable. She knew how Diane would have received the news of the application. She knew the particular face, the arranged encouragement, the private skepticism, the almost imperceptible reference to Jessica's previous attempt. She had protected the application from that. Not out of fear. She had moved past fear of Diane's opinion some years ago, in the way you move past something once you understand its exact dimensions, but out of respect for what she was building. Some things need room to exist before they are ready to be looked at. She had given this 3 months of room. 3 months of early mornings and late nights, and the particular concentration of someone who knows exactly what they are doing and why. Robert looked at Diane. Diane was cutting her food into precise pieces. She said, "It's a wonderful achievement." She said it the way you say something you have decided is the right thing to say, not the way you say something you feel. Robert looked back at Elena. He said, "I'm proud of you." He said it simply, without qualification, without comparison. Elena looked at her father. She had been waiting to hear those words, those exact words, in that exact tone, for a very long time. She had not known until this moment how much she had been waiting. Jessica knocked on Elena's door at 9:30. This was unusual. In 12 years of shared living, Jessica had knocked on Elena's door perhaps a dozen times. Their relationship had never been hostile. Jessica had not inherited her mother's habit of comparison, or if she had never deployed it directly. They were simply not close. Two people occupying the same house, moving in parallel lines that rarely intersected. Elena said, "Come in." Jessica opened the door and stood in the frame for a moment. She was still in her work clothes. She had a junior position at a firm now, the law school applications having been deferred, and she looked tired in the specific way of someone who has been thinking hard about something uncomfortable. She said, "Can I sit down?" Elena said, "Sure." Jessica sat on the edge of the bed. She looked at the sketchbooks on the desk, the wall where Elena had pinned a few prints she liked, careful compositions, nothing decorative. She looked like someone seeing a room for the first time that she had walked past 1,000 times. She said, "Congratulations." On the scholarship, Elena said, "Thank you." A silence. Jessica said, "I applied for that 2 years ago." Elena said, "I know." Jessica said, "I didn't get it." Elena said, "I know." Another silence. Then Jessica said something that Elena had not expected. She said, "I want you to know that I'm sorry for the way things have been in this house, for the way my mother—" She paused, chose her words, "for the way I let things be without ever saying anything." Elena looked at her. Jessica said, "I knew it wasn't fair. I've known for a long time. I didn't say anything. And that's not okay." Elena was quiet for a moment. She had not planned for this conversation. She had not known she needed it until it arrived. She said, "Thank you for saying that." Jessica nodded. She stood up. She looked at the room one more time. She said, "Your work is really good, Elena. I hope you know that." She left. Elena sat with that for a long time. The room was quiet in the particular way rooms are quiet after something true has been said in them. Diane got up at 5:30 the next morning. She did this sometimes when something was unresolved. Early mornings had always been where she did her clearest thinking. She made coffee. She sat at the kitchen table. She had Elena's letter in front of her, not because she had taken it, but because Elena had left it on the counter and nobody had moved it. She read it again. 400 applicants, 1 award. She thought about the years of design work she had watched Elena produce. Sketchbooks always open, always working, always quiet about it. She thought about the universities she had never visited, the professors whose names she didn't know, the friends she had never met. She thought about how little she had asked, how little she had looked, how much she had assumed. She thought about Jessica's application 2 years ago, about how she had positioned it to Robert, to friends, to herself as evidence of Jessica's ambition, her drive, her seriousness. About how she had positioned Elena's different path as evidence of a different kind of future, a smaller one. She thought about the word she had used once to a friend on the phone, not quite quietly enough. Adequate. She had described Elena as adequate. The word sat in her chest now like something she could not put down. She was still sitting there when she heard footsteps on the stairs. Elena coming down for coffee. Elena stopped when she saw Diane. She looked at the letter on the table. She looked at Diane. Diane said, "Sit down, please." Elena sat. Diane said, "I owe you something, and I want to say it clearly, because I have not been clear for a long time." Elena waited. Diane said, "I have not been fair to you. I have compared you constantly to Jessica, and I have made you feel in 100 different ways that you came up short. That was wrong. It was wrong when I started doing it, and it has been wrong every day since." She paused. She said, "I don't know how to undo 12 years. I don't think that's possible. But I want you to know that I see what you've done, what you've built. And I am." Her voice shifted slightly. "I am genuinely sorry that I was not the person who saw it sooner." Elena looked at the woman across the table, the woman who had shaped the climate of her childhood, who had been the weather in the house where she grew up. She did not say it was fine, because it wasn't entirely fine, and saying so would be a kindness Diane hadn't earned and didn't need. But she said, "Thank you for saying that," and she meant it. Not as forgiveness, exactly, but as acknowledgement that the truth had been spoken, that they were both in the room with it now, and that something, not everything, but something could begin from here. Elena left for the Institute in April. The months between the letter and her departure had been different from the years before them. Not transformed. Transformation is rarely so clean, but different. Diane asked questions now, real ones about the program, about what she would be working on, about what the year might lead to. She asked them carefully, with the specific carefulness of someone learning a new behavior and still uncertain of the form. Elena answered them, also carefully, also still finding the form. Robert, for his part, had a long conversation with Elena one Sunday afternoon that had started as a practical discussion about finances and logistics and had become something else entirely. He had said, "I didn't see what was happening for a long time." "I want you to know that I'm sorry for that too," Elena had said. "I know you didn't mean to miss it," he had said. "That's not quite the same as it being okay." She had looked at him. She had said, "No, but it's a place to start." He had nodded. They had sat together for a while after that without speaking. It was the most honest silence they had shared in years. Jessica drove her to the airport. They talked the whole way, properly talked, the way they never quite had in 12 years of shared living, about Jessica's law school applications, which had been resubmitted with more clarity about why she actually wanted it, about Elena's year ahead, which she described with a precision and enthusiasm that she hadn't felt safe showing at the dinner table before. At the departure's entrance, Jessica hugged her. It was the first real hug they had exchanged that either of them could remember. Jessica said, "Come back different." Elena said, "I already am." She went through the doors. On the plane, somewhere over the ocean, Elena opened her sketchbook. She had a new one, bought the week before, still stiff at the spine. She uncapped her pen. She thought about what she wanted the year to be. Not in terms of achievement. Achievement had a way of taking care of itself when you stayed focused on the work. But in terms of what she wanted to become, she thought about her mother's lesson, negative space, what you choose to leave out. She had spent 12 years in a house that was full of a particular kind of noise, the noise of comparison, of being measured and found insufficient. She was leaving that behind now, not erasing it. She understood that it had shaped her as much as anything else, had given her the particular focused discipline of someone who has learned to find stillness inside difficulty. But she was leaving it, and the space it left behind was not absence. It was room for whatever she was going to build next. She began to draw. The plane hummed around her. Below, the ocean was very dark and very wide. Above it, she was moving towards something. She was ready. She did not look back, not because there was nothing there, but because everything worth looking at was finally, clearly, in front of her. There is a particular cruelty in comparison, not because it is always intended as cruelty. Often it isn't. Often it is simply the habit of a person who has decided, without realizing they have decided, that love is distributed through ranking, that one person's worth can only be established by measuring it against another's. Diane was not a monster. She was a woman who loved her daughter completely, and who had never learned how to hold that love without making it a comparison, without, in the process, diminishing the person standing next to her. And Elena, who heard those comparisons for 12 years and never let them become the truth about herself, did something remarkable. She stayed quiet. She kept working. She built something real, alone, in her own room, in the hours that belonged entirely to her. Not to prove anyone wrong, because her mother had told her once that she saw things other people missed, and she had decided, at 8 years old and 11 and 14, and every year after that, to believe it. So if someone in your life has spent years telling you what you are, measuring you, comparing you, deciding your ceiling before you've even begun to climb, I want you to hear this clearly. They do not get to decide that. Only you do. Only the work does. Only the quiet, patient, private hours of building something true. The letter always comes eventually. For the people who keep going, it always comes. If Elena's story stayed with you, if it reminded you that you get to decide your own ceiling, please like this video and subscribe to Poppy Tales. Leave us a comment. Has someone ever compared you and gotten it completely wrong? We read every single one. And if you know someone who needs this reminder today, someone who has been told they come up short, share this story with them. Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is say, I see what you're building. Thank you for being here. I'm Luna. This is Poppy. Until next time.